In 1994, three dark-skinned triplet girls disappear in South Carolina. 30 years later, their parents receive a photo that reveals the terrible truth. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what city you're from. It really matters to us. The air was thick with the smell of honeysuckle and the distant murmur of cicadas humming in the trees as the summer sun dipped behind the pine trees of Halston, South Carolina. On Maple Ridge Lane, where the cracked asphalt curved around narrow yards dotted with swing sets and rusted mailboxes, the Hunt family was settling in for the evening. Their modest home, a weathered single-story house with faded white siding and a creaky front porch, stood near the edge of the woods that ran behind the neighborhood. The structure wasn't much to look at, but inside it pulsed with life and laughter, the kind born only from love that had been tested and refused to break. Valerie Hunt, a 32-year-old mother of three, sat on the porch step with her camera balanced in her lap. The sun had turned the sky gold and magenta, casting a warm hue across the lawn where her daughters, Aisha, Latifa, and Nia, danced barefoot in the grass. Identical in almost every way except for their personalities, the girls wore matching homemade cotton dresses with sunflowers stitched at the hem. Valerie had sewn the dresses herself, staying up late for a week straight to get them just right. Their hair, done in neat braids, swung as they twirled and giggled, chasing fireflies and blowing bubbles through the lingering dusk. She lifted the camera, adjusted the focus, and snapped a photo as the three girls lined up shoulder to shoulder, arms linked, grinning with a joy that seemed too large for their 6-year-old frames. Behind them, the soft shadows of the woods loomed. Valerie smiled to herself, unaware that the picture she had just taken would become the last trace of them for the next 30 years. Inside the house, Marcus Hunt was washing up from his shift at the paper mill, his calloused hands raw from a full day of lifting. He was younger than he looked, 35, with silver already threading his short, coarse hair. Life had taken its toll, but it hadn't dimmed the steady fire in his chest, the one that burned for his daughters. They were his world. He and Valerie didn't have much, but they had love and a fierce determination to raise their girls right, no matter what they lacked in money. That night, as Valerie tucked the girls into their shared bed, a second-hand bunk with a trundle mattress pulled out underneath, she hummed softly under her breath. Each girl received a kiss and a whispered, "I love you," followed by their nightly ritual of questions. Will you still love me when I'm old? Will you remember my name if I turn into a cat? Valerie answered every one with patience and a smile, as she always did. Then the room fell quiet. Outside, the moon climbed slowly behind wisps of cloud. A fan buzzed in the corner of the hallway. Valerie returned to the kitchen to rinse out cups and prepare her work apron for the next morning. Marcus sat at the table, going over overdue bills with a furrowed brow. Neither of them knew that they had less than an hour left before their lives would be split into two, the time before and the time after. It started with a sound, faint, like the scrape of branches or maybe the creak of floorboards. Valerie paused, sponge in hand, tilting her head toward the hallway. Marcus looked up. They both waited. Nothing. She laughed softly and shook her head. But minutes later, when Valerie passed by the girls' room on her way to the bathroom, she froze. The door, which she had left cracked open, was now wide. The fan's hum was louder now, the air colder. She stepped inside. The beds were empty. At first, she thought they might be hiding, playing a prank. Her voice trembled as she called out their names. No response. She looked under the trundle, behind the curtains, even in the closet. Nothing. Her breath caught in her throat. Her knees buckled. "Marcus!" she screamed. He was there in seconds, eyes wide, heart pounding. Together they searched the house. The front door was still locked. The windows were shut. No broken glass, no muddy footprints, just absence. A terrible, echoing absence. They ran outside, calling into the night. Neighbors emerged in pajamas and robes, clutching flashlights and confusion. Police were called. Hours passed in a blur of red and blue lights, clipped questions, and notepads. Dogs were brought in. Officers fanned out through the woods with flashlights, calling names into the darkness. By dawn, there was still no sign of Aisha, Latifa, or Nia. The official story started to congeal within days. There were no signs of forced entry, no witnesses, no ransom note, no fingerprints that didn't already belong in the house. The investigating officer, a man with thinning hair and a permanent squint, mentioned more than once that children sometimes just wander off. He said it with a shrug that made Valerie want to scream. But these were not girls who wandered. They had a nightly routine. They were 6, they were loved, and now they were gone. The town rallied for a week. Flyers were printed. Church groups held vigils. Volunteers combed the woods. Then the momentum slowed. Reporters stopped coming. Questions dried up. Tips turned to nothing. The official case was reclassified as unresolved family incident. Whispers started. Maybe the parents had done something. Maybe the children had never been real. Valerie was quietly asked not to return to work. Marcus was questioned twice more, then left alone. Valerie, once vibrant, began to dim. She stopped speaking to neighbors. She stopped smiling. She stopped sleeping. Her hair thinned. Her clothes hung loose. Eventually, she packed a suitcase and left Marcus behind. She drove until the road blurred and the past followed no more. She changed her number, got a new job, tried to survive. Marcus stayed. He couldn't leave. He walked the perimeter of the woods every day, even after the police gave up. He saved every newspaper clipping, every police record, every letter from supposed psychics and self-proclaimed mediums. His daughters weren't gone. They were taken. He knew it. In time, the Hunt house was sold to pay off debts, then abandoned, then torn down. But some things remained. In a small cedar box, Valerie kept that last photograph, her daughters smiling in the amber light of a summer evening, framed by trees. She had looked at it hundreds of times, but never once had she noticed the red smear behind them, barely visible in the corner, like the outline of a door that shouldn't have been there. Not until 30 years later, when it came back to her in the mail. 30 years later, the photograph arrived without explanation. No return address, no message. Just a plain white envelope with a slightly wrinkled corner and a South Carolina postmark slipped through the mail slot of a second-floor apartment in a modest complex on the outskirts of Atlanta. Kendra Blake noticed it only after it had sat among grocery store ads and utility bills on her kitchen counter for most of the afternoon. She'd nearly thrown it out with the junk. The weight of the envelope wasn't much, barely more than a single sheet of paper, but the moment her fingers touched the edge of the photo inside, something in her chest shifted. It was the kind of subtle unease a seasoned investigative journalist learns to trust. Kendra had spent the last decade reporting freelance on missing persons and cold cases, often stepping into shadows other reporters avoided. She knew that nothing arrived by accident. She pulled the photograph out slowly. It was old, clearly from the early 90s. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, and the colors had that sun-faded softness of a decades-old snapshot. 3 little girls stood in the center, dressed in identical pale blue dresses, with small sunflowers stitched near the hem. They were barefoot, their feet darkened with dirt, their arms wrapped around each other. Their smiles were so wide, so full of life, it almost hurt to look at them. It was the background that froze her breath. Behind the girls, mostly obscured by trees and dappled light, was a structure. A house, perhaps, or a shed. It was difficult to tell, but one detail stood out with jarring clarity. A door. A bright, unmistakably red door. Not maroon, not rust-colored. Red like blood or a stop sign. It looked out of place, almost surreal, as if someone had painted it onto the photo after the fact. Kendra turned the photo over. Nothing written. No date, no location, but something about the image tugged at her. She scanned the girls' faces again. They were all the same age, maybe 5 or 6. Their hair was braided, parted neatly, each in a slightly different pattern. One had a front tooth missing. Another had a string of beads around her wrist. The third was squinting slightly, as though the sun had been in her eyes. They looked like sisters. No, triplets. She left her tea cooling on the windowsill and sat at her laptop. Within minutes, she was diving into databases using facial recognition tools she'd become adept with over the years. She entered descriptors: 3 African-American girls, approximate age 6, photograph estimated date between 1990 and 1995. Her search took her into archives of missing children, public record databases, and national registries. It didn't take long to find the case. Halston, South Carolina, June 14, 1994. Aisha, Latifah, and Nia Hunt, 6-year-old triplets, disappeared from their home during the night. No forced entry, no signs of struggle. The case had gone cold within months. The girls had never been seen again. Kendra leaned back in her chair, heart beating faster. The photo in her hand showed them outside, happy, likely hours, maybe minutes, before they vanished. Yet this photograph wasn't listed in any public archive. She found the missing poster, a grainy scan with only one formal image of each girl, presumably school portraits. But not this photo. Not the one with the red door. She dug deeper. Halston had long been considered a place with limited resources and limited interest and controversy. The case file was closed. No new leads had been reported since 1996. The parents, Marcus and Valerie Hunt, had separated the following year. Marcus remained in the town. Valerie had disappeared from public records. Kendra's fingers hovered over her keyboard. She wasn't just looking at another cold case. Something about this felt personal, deliberate. Someone wanted her to see this photo. Someone wanted this case reopened. That night, she couldn't sleep. The image of the red door burned behind her eyelids. She had examined the photo for signs of manipulation. None. She scanned it with forensic tools. Nothing suggested it had been doctored. But the door didn't make sense. According to historical maps, aerial photos, and property surveys from 1994, there was no structure with a red door anywhere near the Hunts' residence. In fact, there were no structures in the woods behind the neighborhood at all. By morning, she had booked a rental car. Halston hadn't changed much since 1994. If anything, it had grown quieter. The storefronts in the town square were a mix of the abandoned and the barely surviving. The old gas station had been turned into a bait shop. The library still used a card catalog. Kendra drove slowly through the streets, guided by printed directions, cell reception long since gone. Maple Ridge Lane was still there. The houses were different, some torn down, some rebuilt, but the curve of the street remained. The lot where the Hunt house once stood was now an overgrown patch of grass and weeds, surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. someone had nailed a faded "For Sale" sign to a tree, the phone number barely legible. Kendra parked at the edge of the block and stepped out, holding the photograph in one hand. A warm wind rustled the trees behind her. She walked the length of the lot, trying to match angles from the picture. The trees had grown, but the slope of the land was the same. She turned in a slow circle, aligning the angle of sunlight and shadows from the photo with the current scene. The red door would have stood just beyond the fence line, where the woods thickened. But now there was nothing. No house, no foundation, no remnants of a building, just trees and silence. She asked around. The neighbors who remained were mostly elderly. Some remembered the case. "A damn shame," one woman said. "Those girls were sweet. Mama always kept them clean and polite." Another muttered about the parents. They were different. Quiet folk. Some said it was them. Took their own kids. But no one remembered a red door. Kendra found Valerie 2 hours outside of town, living in a trailer park tucked behind a highway diner. The lot was quiet, the air heavy with the scent of engine oil and pine. Valerie opened the door after 3 knocks. Her face was older, paler than in the newspaper photo Kendra had seen, but her eyes, dark, sharp, weary, were unmistakable. "I'm not doing interviews," she said without preamble. "I'm not here for an interview," Kendra replied. "I'm here because someone sent me this." She held out the photo. Valerie's face didn't move for several seconds. Then her hand reached out slowly, like she was afraid the picture might dissolve if she touched it. Her fingers trembled as she took it. Her eyes locked onto the faces of her daughters, and something in her expression cracked. Where did you get this?" she whispered. "It came to me anonymously," Kendra said. "Yesterday. I think it's important." Valerie nodded, still staring. "I took this, myself, with my Kodak. I remember the day. They were playing with dandelions. Nia had just gotten her beads. Aisha kept tugging Latifah's braid. She traced the edges of the photo with her thumb. I thought this picture was lost forever." She sat down on the stoop, still holding the photo, silent for a long moment. "I looked at this 100 times back then. Never saw it." "Saw what?" Valerie pointed. "That," she said, "that red door. That was never there." Kendra sat beside her. "You're sure?" Valerie's voice was hollow. "We lived there 5 years. There was never a house back there. Nothing but trees." "Could someone have built something temporary?" "Not without us knowing, and not that close. I'd have seen it." Kendra took the photo gently. "I checked all the old property records. The lot behind your house was registered as undeveloped land. But in older records, 1982 I think, there was a note, a structure labeled Mission of St. Emmanuel. It disappeared from records in 1990. Valerie looked at her, eyes narrowed. "What kind of mission?" "I'm trying to find out." That night, Kendra booked a room in the only motel in town. She didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, the fan spinning slow above her. In her mind, 3 girls danced in summer dresses under a bleeding red door, and somewhere far from here, someone was watching, waiting, and maybe, just maybe, regretting that they'd let the photograph resurface at all. Morning crept over Halston like a slow exhale, the pale light making everything look older and smaller. Kendra sat at the window of the roadside motel, watching the mist burn off the parking lot as a truck pulled away. She had barely slept. The red door lingered in her mind, vivid and impossible, a scarlet thread woven into a fabric that should never have included it. The photograph lay beside her on the table. Worn now from being handled so much, the edges frayed from Valerie's trembling fingers the day before. She had promised to come back. Valerie hadn't asked for anything, not even details. She simply said, "If you find something, I want to know. I deserve that." Kendra had nodded. She didn't say aloud what she was thinking, that what they might find could hurt more than the not knowing had. Kendra's next destination was clear: the father. According to the scant recent records she could find, Marcus Hunt still lived in Halston, if it could be called living. He wasn't listed with a phone number or on social media. Property databases showed he'd owned and sold a small parcel of land just outside of town a decade ago. More recently, there was a registered mailing address to a trailer lot on the far edge of the county line, near an old industrial plant. She drove there now, the trees blurring past as the road narrowed and cracked beneath her tires. The trailer lot was not the kind of place people stumbled upon. It clung to the edge of a decaying pine forest, a cluster of single-wides and rusting sheds surrounded by chain-link fences and barking dogs. It smelled faintly of oil, damp leaves, and the ever-present rot of things left too long in the rain. Kendra parked beside a battered mailbox marked simply Hunt and walked the short dirt path to the trailer's door. The man who answered was not what she expected. Marcus Hunt had the build of someone who once worked with his hands and hadn't yet forgotten how. His shoulders were broad beneath a faded jacket, his face weathered but alert. He didn't look surprised to see her. His eyes were sharp, dark, and unflinching as he took her in. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. "Kendra Blake," she said, holding out a card. "I'm a journalist." He took the card but didn't look at it. "Why now?" he asked. "Because someone sent me this." She handed him the photograph. He took it with the same reverence Valerie had. But where Valerie's fingers had trembled, Marcus's were steady. He studied the image for a long time, saying nothing. Then he walked back inside the trailer, leaving the door open behind him. She followed. The space inside was tight, dim, and remarkably clean. A single table stood beneath a buzzing ceiling light, covered in stacks of yellowing folders, newspaper clippings, maps, and copies of what looked like official forms and correspondence. The walls were pinned with timelines, photos of 3 girls aged 6, and circles drawn in red ink around places, dates, and names. Kendra stopped short. "You kept everything," she murmured. "I never stopped," he said. He laid the photo carefully on the table and picked up a magnifying glass. He looked at the red door in the corner of the image. "That wasn't there," he said without looking up. "Not back then, but I see it now." "I know," Kendra said quietly. Marcus sat in the worn chair and motioned for her to sit across from him. He leafed through a folder, pulling out a copy of a topographical map. He pointed to a shaded section just beyond Maple Ridge Lane. "Property line ends here. That's where our backyard stopped. Beyond that, undeveloped land. That's what the county called it." He flipped to a photocopy of a deed, dated 1982. But before that, it was owned by a private religious organization, St. Emmanuel's Outreach Mission. Kendra leaned in. "Same name Valerie gave me. I've been trying to trace it for years, but it was dissolved in 1990. No forwarding information. The land was donated back to the county, except no paperwork confirming the transfer was ever filed. It's like the organization evaporated." What did they do? Claimed to house troubled children, unwed mothers, immigrant families, a few newspaper blurbs about them in the 70s, then nothing. Kendra reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. I had this scanned. It's from the original negative Valerie gave me. She laid a glossy print on the table, an enhanced version of the photograph. The girls were clearer now, the lighting adjusted. But more importantly, the shadows behind them had been digitally enhanced. "There," she said, pointing. "Look in the window behind the red door." Marcus stared. Inside the dark glass, just visible, was a faint silhouette. A man, perhaps. Tall, thin. Just a blur, but human. And behind him, something that looked like a shape. Small, like a child, half obscured by the curtain. His jaw tightened. "I remember that night," he said. "Something woke me up. I thought I saw a red light through the trees, like brake lights. But I didn't hear a car, no engine, just this glow. I got up, checked the yard. The back gate was shut, no footprints in the dirt, but I knew something was wrong. When Valerie started screaming, I already knew." He stood and walked to a locked drawer, opened it, and brought out another photo. This one was older, grainier. It showed the backyard from a slightly different angle, taken during a neighborhood cookout. Children ran through the grass. In the background, the same woods. No door, no building, no red. "I've looked at every photo ever taken behind that house. That door never shows up. Until now." Kendra pulled out her laptop. She opened a map overlay she had been working on for weeks, an array of pins across South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. Each pin marked a child who had disappeared between 1980 and 1999. Most cases had long gone cold. Most had similarities. Minority children from poor families, often reported as wanderers or runaways. Each had some irregularity. Missing records, missing reports, closed files without explanation. In several of them, red doors had been mentioned. She clicked a file. This girl disappeared in 1991. Her drawing, done the week before she vanished, had a red door in the background. The teacher thought it was symbolic. Another case, 1996. A boy who had nightmares about a room behind the red door. His foster parents wrote it off as trauma. He disappeared a month later. Marcus stared at the map. "You think it's all connected?" "I think someone made them disappear," Kendra said. "And I think they were taken for a reason." He sat back down, folding his arms. "What do you want from me?" "To help me find out who's behind this." He looked down at the photo again. His finger rested just beneath Nia's smile. "I never stopped looking," he said, "even when the cops called me crazy, even when Valerie left, even when the papers said we were guilty." "I know," Kendra said, "and now we might finally have something real." He nodded slowly. "Then let's go find them." Later that afternoon, they visited the Halston County Records Office together. Kendra had requested access to archived zoning maps, and Marcus had a stack of handwritten case numbers and microfilm references. After several hours of sifting through brittle pages and half-legible notes, they found what they were looking for. A 1982 topographic map clearly showed a building labeled St. Emmanuel's Youth Refuge. The building's outline sat exactly where the red door appeared in the photograph, but by 1991, it was gone from the maps. No demolition permit was ever filed. They followed that lead to a retired county inspector, a man named Harlan Briggs. He remembered the place, remembered going out there once, back in '88, to inspect the septic system. "Weird place," he said. "Didn't look like a church, looked like a regular house. Kids were real quiet, man who ran it, Denton or Dent, something like that. Real polite, gave me lemonade. I didn't stay long." Marcus stiffened. "Felix Denton?" Briggs nodded. "That's the one." Kendra's pulse quickened. She had seen that name before, buried in old Foundation grant files from the mid-90s. But, more importantly, it appeared in recent news under a different title. Reverend Dr. Felix Morrison, community leader, founder of the Children's Haven Initiative, national speaker, candidate for lieutenant governor. She opened her laptop, searched the name. His photo appeared at the top of the search results. A tall man, now in his 60s, still slender, smiling in a tailored suit. Valerie had said, "He came to our church once." Marcus stared at the screen. "I've seen that face before," he said. Kendra nodded. "He built the Red Door." Evening in Halston descended with a quiet finality, as if the town itself retreated inward when the sun began to fall. In the dim glow of the motel desk lamp, Kendra sat cross-legged on her bed, a legal pad balanced on her knee, the photograph of the girls laid out beside her. The light from the bulb was faintly yellow, but it sharpened the red in the photo's background until it looked freshly painted, almost wet. She stared at it long enough for the image to blur, the door turning into a gaping wound behind the girls' smiling faces. She thought of Marcus's voice that morning, low, steady, grief-hardened, when he'd said, "He built the Red Door." Not literally, not with his own hands, perhaps, but in every way that mattered, the man known now as Reverend Dr. Felix Morrison had created whatever waited behind it. Kendra opened her laptop and stared at the man's campaign site, clean and polished, full of carefully curated testimonials and staged photographs. There were shots of him hugging children, shaking hands with farmers, speaking from pulpits with a gravity that radiated through the screen. "A voice for the voiceless" was scrawled across the banner in gold serif letters. The site listed his accomplishments: founder of the Children's Haven Initiative, a multi-state program providing housing, mentorship, and spiritual guidance to at-risk youth. Dozens of endorsements, millions in funding. There was no mention of St. Emmanuel's, no mention of Halston, no mention of any religious center that operated before 1991. She picked up her phone and called Valerie. It rang 5 times before the woman answered. Her voice was quiet, as if she'd been expecting the call all day. "You found something," she said. "We did," Kendra replied. "We know who ran the mission behind your house." His name back then was Felix Denton. Now he goes by Reverend Dr. Felix Morrison. A long pause followed. Then Valerie said, almost to herself, "I knew it. I knew that face." She told Kendra a story from 30 years ago. A Sunday service, a visiting preacher who spoke softly but intensely, his words dripping with warmth and menace in equal measure. Valerie had been young then, tired and overworked, but she remembered the way he'd looked at her daughters, smiled at them, patted Nia's head as if he owned her. "He gave me his card," she whispered, "told me if I ever needed help with the girls I could bring them to the mission. That was a month before they disappeared." Kendra's heart thudded. "Do you still have the card?" "No, I tore it up the day they vanished." Valerie went silent. Then, almost inaudibly, she said, "You think he took them?" "I think he took many children," Kendra said, "and I think he started with yours." The next day, she and Marcus drove into Charleston. The state archives were located in a squat brick building surrounded by manicured grass and the heavy perfume of magnolia trees. Inside, Kendra submitted her request to access old, nonprofit records, grant filings, and church registrations from the 1980s and 1990s. After 3 hours of digging, she found it. A single-page registration form for St. Emmanuel's Outreach Mission, filed in 1980 by a man named Felix D. Morrison, though the signature at the bottom read F. Denton. The address was listed as a parcel of land outside Halston, the same parcel that had since reverted to county property. The listed purpose of the mission was to provide temporary shelter and spiritual development for children in crisis. No tax returns. No operating reports. No closure documentation. She photographed everything. They followed that trail to a decommissioned county building in Columbia, where she filed a public records request for property sales and donations made under any of Morrison's aliases. 1 week later, a brown envelope arrived at her motel desk. Inside were 8 addresses across 3 states, all once registered to front organizations now tied to Felix Morrison's newer foundation. All listed as rehabilitation homes, temporary residential centers, or restorative faith shelters. Kendra stared at the list. The first 6 had been shut down between 1999 and 2007. The 7th was demolished in 2011 after a fire. But the 8th, a private compound outside of Macon, Georgia, was still active, now operating under the name Hope's Refuge. She drove there the next morning. It wasn't easy to find. The road turned from pavement to gravel, then from gravel to a single dirt track through a forest of pine and moss. She passed 2 gates, both chained open, and one weathered sign that simply read "Private Property" in faded red letters. Finally, the trees parted into a clearing, and the building came into view. It looked ordinary, a large farmhouse with a wraparound porch, white paint peeling in the Georgia humidity. A basketball hoop leaned crookedly over a cracked asphalt square. The front door was mercifully brown. Children played in the yard, all under the age of 10. 2 adult staffers supervised them with the detached efficiency of longtime caretakers. Kendra parked at the edge of the lot and approached slowly, holding her press badge in one hand. A woman in a denim skirt and oversized t-shirt met her at the walkway. Her expression was guarded. "Can I help you?" "I'm writing a piece about faith-based child welfare programs," Kendra lied smoothly. "I've heard a lot about Hope's Refuge. Would it be possible to speak with someone?" The woman hesitated. "We don't usually allow unannounced visitors." "I won't take much time," Kendra said. "Just trying to understand how this program works, especially with its history." That landed. The woman's brow twitched. "History? You're one of the last active homes from the original Children's Haven model," Kendra continued. "Founded by Reverend Morrison, right?" The woman shifted on her feet. "Reverend Morrison doesn't come around much anymore. He's busy with his campaign. I'd still love to speak with whoever runs things day to day." The woman sighed, then motioned her toward the house. Inside, the air was cooler but heavy with the scent of bleach and something fainter, like old wood and boiled vegetables. Children's drawings lined the hallway, smiling suns, lopsided hearts, crude portraits with stick limbs. One of the staffers introduced himself as Brother Caleb and led Kendra to an office filled with cheap furniture and a large photo of Morrison on the wall. She asked her questions. How many children lived there? Where were they from? What was the intake process? Brother Caleb answered every question with practiced care, saying little and offering less. No, they didn't keep children long term. No, they didn't involve outside therapists. No, they weren't required to submit to state inspections unless allegations were filed. When she asked about St. Emmanuel's, he frowned. "That was before my time," he said. "A lot of the early homes aren't around anymore. Things were different back then." "Different how?" He hesitated. "Less oversight," he said finally. "More freedom." Kendra left with a tight knot in her chest. That night, she shared everything with Marcus and Valerie. The list of homes, the drawings, the intake forms with forged birth dates and erased surnames, and the name Hope's Refuge that appeared in a 1995 court document as the alleged destination for a child relocated from Halston County after family abandonment. The name on the document was blacked out, but the date matched. June 15, 1994. The day after Aisha, Latifa, and Nia vanished. Valerie pressed the paper to her chest. Marcus closed his eyes. "They didn't disappear," he said. "They were transferred." Kendra nodded. "And now we follow that transfer to its end." The sky above Georgia was a dull, iron gray as Kendra drove north out of Macon, her windshield speckled with intermittent rain. It came down in threads at first, then with a steady pulse, blurring the road and turning the shoulders of the highway into watery mirrors. Her fingers clenched the steering wheel as she navigated each mile, the weight of the manila folder on the passenger seat pressing against her thoughts like a heartbeat. Inside the folder were two names. Two women. Two identities manufactured by someone else and stitched into lives that had never truly been theirs. Kendra had spent the past week following a paper trail from the Georgia Department of Health and Human Services to a private adoption attorney in Charlotte, and finally to an encrypted genealogy database accessible only to those who knew how to search for ghosts. Their real names had been erased, rewritten. But DNA doesn't forget. Aisha was now Ashley Rivera, a singer-songwriter based in Brooklyn, whose modest fame came from uploading acoustic covers in stairwells and subways. Her voice had a tremor to it, like something caught between grief and grace, and her fans often said she sounded like someone who had lived 10 lives before 25. Latifa was now Nicole Stanton, a trauma nurse in Columbus, Ohio. Her hospital records painted her as resilient, calm in crisis, and fiercely protective of her pediatric patients. Co-workers said she never cried, even after a child died. She kept a gold bracelet in her locker, a piece of jewelry she never wore but never left behind. Kendra had watched hours of videos, read interviews, skimmed hospital staff notes, and spoken, without revealing too much, to people in their circles. She knew Ashley had been adopted at age 7 by a couple in Connecticut who divorced 2 years later. She knew Nicole had grown up in a strict religious household and left at 18, never looking back. Both women had gaps in their memories. Both had inconsistent stories about their early years. Both had features unmistakably shared with the girls in the photograph. She called Marcus and Valerie from a rest stop near Richmond. Their voices were hushed, as though speaking too loudly might scare the moment away. "Are you sure?" Valerie asked, her voice cracking. "I'm sure," Kendra said. "They're yours." There was silence, thick and trembling. "We want to meet them," Marcus said finally, "if they'll let us." Kendra didn't promise anything. She knew the next part would be delicate. She drove first to Columbus. The hospital was a brick and glass monolith with cold elevators and corridors lined with pale blue chairs. She waited in the cafeteria for nearly 2 hours before Nicole arrived. She looked tired but composed, her scrubs marked with faint splashes of iodine. Kendra recognized her instantly. "Miss Stanton," Kendra said, standing. Nicole's eyes narrowed, the way people's do when they sense something's about to change. "I'm not buying anything," she said. "I'm not selling anything," Kendra replied. "I'm here about your birth family." Nicole stiffened. She didn't sit. "I don't have one." Kendra hesitated. Then she placed a copy of the photograph on the table. Nicole stared at it. "That's not me," she said. "You think that," Kendra said gently, "but it is." She watched Nicole's mouth press into a line. The woman leaned down, picked up the photo and examined the girls. Her fingers trembled just slightly at the corners. Kendra didn't speak. She let the silence stretch, let the questions bloom in Nicole's mind. "I used to have dreams," Nicole said finally. "A place with trees, a backyard. Sometimes there was a door, a red one, but I thought I made it up." "You didn't," Kendra said. "Your name used to be Latifah Hunt. You had 2 sisters. You disappeared when you were 6 years old." Nicole didn't cry. She sat down slowly and placed the photo in front of her. "What happened to us?" Kendra told her. "Not all of it. Not yet. Just enough to make the ground beneath her feet crack." An hour later, Nicole walked out of the hospital without clocking out. She needed air. They sat in Kendra's car, windows fogged from the rain, as she looked through the folder. Court documents, falsified adoption papers, and, finally, a sealed DNA result confirming the match with Valerie Hunt. Nicole closed the folder. "I want to meet them," she said, "but I'm not ready to be anybody's daughter. Not yet." Kendra nodded. "That's okay." She waited a day before heading to Brooklyn. Ashley was harder to reach. Her manager dismissed Kendra's calls, and her agent's assistant insisted she didn't take unsolicited media inquiries. So Kendra went to the source. She found Ashley recording an acoustic set in a converted loft, the space full of exposed brick and tangled cables. Her voice echoed through the rafters like smoke. When the set ended, Kendra approached. "I'm not a fan," she said. "I'm a journalist, and I think I know who you really are." Ashley blinked at her. She was smaller in person, more fragile-looking, with a kind of unspoken tension in her shoulders. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she said. Kendra handed her the photograph. Ashley stared at it for a long time. Then she turned and walked away. But 2 days later, Kendra's phone rang. Ashley's voice was shaky. "I have this necklace," she said. "It's ugly, cheap little beads. I've had it as long as I can remember. I used to tell people it was from my birth mom, but I didn't know if that was true." "It is," Kendra said. "Valerie made it. She still has the matching one." Ashley's breath hitched. "I always wondered why I hated the color red," she whispered. Kendra waited. "I want to see them," Ashley said. Back in Halston, Marcus and Valerie stood in their tiny kitchen, the clock ticking too loudly on the wall, the photograph now framed on the table. Kendra sat with them and described the conversations she'd had. "They're coming," she said. "They're not sure what they want yet, but they want to meet you." Valerie covered her mouth with both hands. Marcus turned away, eyes glassy. That weekend they met in Charleston. A quiet park near the harbor. Kendra waited nearby, heart pounding, as a family who had been broken into pieces 3 decades ago took hesitant steps toward each other. Ashley approached first, her hands shaking, the beaded necklace around her neck. Nicole walked slower, watching her parents with guarded eyes. Valerie moved first, one trembling step, then another. Her arms opened. The sound she made when she reached them was not quite a cry, not quite a gasp. It was something deeper. Ashley folded into her mother's embrace, and Nicole stood frozen for a heartbeat before Marcus pulled her into a hug that said everything no words ever could. They stayed like that for a long time, a knot slowly, carefully, beginning to untangle. Later, over coffee in a nearby cafe, Nicole asked the question Kendra had been waiting for. "What about the third?" Ashley looked up. "There were 3 of us," she said softly. Kendra nodded. "She's still missing, but I think I know where she went." The road to the house was narrower than Kendra remembered, or perhaps the trees had grown closer over the years, leaning in from both sides as if to shield what lay at the end of the path. The dirt lane was barely wider than her car, swallowed on either side by thick pine and underbrush, their branches arching overhead like ribs. She had borrowed Marcus's truck this time, wary of taking her low sedan into territory that felt increasingly remote, increasingly wrong. The silence out here was absolute. No bird song, no rustle of wildlife, just the grind of tires over gravel and the rhythmic creak of branches against the frame. She had the GPS coordinates written on paper just in case. The satellite signal had already dropped an hour ago. Her phone, now just a blank screen with a blinking red icon, lay face down in the passenger seat. As the truck rounded a slow bend, the trees parted just enough to reveal a clearing. A sagging two-story farmhouse crouched at the center, its white paint long faded to the color of bone, its shutters hanging askew. A sagging barn loomed nearby, and a rusted weather vane spun idly on the roof. The grass was tall, nearly waist-high, and choked with thistle and burrs. A mailbox stood crooked at the edge of the clearing, its numbers long since rusted away. The red door, exactly as she remembered from the photograph, sat in the center of the porch like a wound that refused to close. Kendra turned off the ignition and stepped out. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and mildew. Her boots sank slightly into the grass as she crossed toward the porch, each step accompanied by the crunch of dead leaves. The wood beneath her feet groaned with rot. She raised her hand to knock, then stopped. The silence was too complete. Her breath, her heartbeat, the buzz of blood in her ears, everything felt too loud. She tried the knob. It turned with a click. Inside, the air was colder, stiller. Dust motes hung in the light that filtered through grime-smeared windows. The front hall opened into a parlor with threadbare furniture and peeling wallpaper. Children's drawings were still taped to the walls, crayon suns, stick figures with oversized heads, houses with uneven windows. In one drawing, the door was red. In every drawing, the door was red. She moved slowly from room to room, careful not to disturb anything. The house had been lived in, but not recently. The beds were made, but the linens were faded and untouched. A set of bunk beds in one room bore faint etchings in the wood, names carved with childish fingers. She traced them slowly. Lonnie, Ava, Grace. One was scratched out. Downstairs, in what must have once been an office, she found a cabinet with a broken lock. Inside were files, hundreds of them, manila folders marked with initials, dates, and codes she didn't recognize. She began pulling them out, laying them across the floor, scanning each one. The documents inside were sparse: intake forms, behavioral notes, false birth certificates. Most were stamped with the emblem of the Children's Haven Initiative. Others bore the faded crest of St. Emmanuel's. But then she found one marked only with the letter N. Inside was a photo. A little girl with deep brown eyes and a faint scar above her right eyebrow. She was no older than 6. The date on the bottom read June 13th, 1994. The name field was left blank. Kendra sat back on her heels, breath caught in her throat. It was Nia. Her hand shook as she read the notes. Subject displays signs of selective mutism. Will not respond to given name. Withdrawn. Limited verbal engagement. Has shown attachment to other subjects L and A. Recommended. Private placement. There was an address. It wasn't this one. A second property. The note simply called it Residence B. Kendra photographed the page. She stuffed the folder into her bag along with several others and backed out of the room. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until it was too late. Looking for someone? a voice asked. She froze. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the light from the porch. He wasn't old, but his face carried the weight of years. Sharp cheekbones, pale eyes, and a mouth set in something between amusement and suspicion. He wore work boots and a plain flannel shirt, and his hands were empty. But his presence made the air feel heavier. "I saw your truck," he said. "Private property, you know." Kendra straightened. "I'm with the press," she said, "looking into the history of this place. Are you the caretaker?" The man studied her, then nodded once. "You could say that." "Do you know what this house was used for?" she asked. "I know what people say," he replied. "But people say a lot of things. Stories grow in places like this." She took a step forward. "Were you here in 1994? The man didn't answer. He turned and walked out onto the porch. Kendra followed. "Who lived here?" she asked. "Kids," he said, "for a while. And him." "Felix Morrison?" He didn't reply, but his silence was answer enough. "Did you know a girl named Nia?" He looked at her sharply. "You should leave," he said. "Now." She didn't move. "She's alive," Kendra said. "We know she was here. We know she was taken from Halston. And we know this house was one of the stops." The man's jaw clenched. "She wasn't like the others," he muttered. "Didn't speak, wouldn't eat unless she was fed by hand. He said she was special, different." "Where is she now?" Kendra demanded. He shook his head. "I don't know. He took her, said she needed peace, said she wasn't ready to be around other children." "Where did he take her?" He turned, meeting her eyes for the first time. "There's a place," he said. "Not far. Gated. Hidden. They call it the Retreat. He used to take the quiet ones there, the ones who wouldn't forget." Kendra's heart pounded. "Do you have an address?" He didn't answer, but he took a notepad from his pocket, scribbled something, and handed it to her. "You didn't get it from me." She turned to leave. "Tell her," he called after her. "Tell her she wasn't forgotten." Back in Halston, Kendra drove straight to Valerie and Marcus. The sisters were still there, sitting together on a couch like magnets, slowly relearning their pull. When Kendra walked in, the room went silent. She handed Valerie the folder. "She was there," she said. Valerie's hands trembled as she opened it. When she saw the photo, she collapsed into Marcus's arms. Ashley and Nicole leaned in, their faces white with shock. "She's alive," Kendra said. "I'm going to find her." "I'm going with you," Marcus said. "I want to come too," Valerie whispered. Ashley nodded. "We all do." Kendra looked at them, the family once torn apart, now inching back together, and nodded. "Then let's bring her home." The final stretch of road twisted like a vein through the forest, flanked on both sides by trees that had stood for decades, silent sentinels to whatever secrets lay hidden in the soil. They drove in a slow caravan, Kendra in front with Marcus, Valerie and Ashley in the second car, Nicole following behind in her rental. The air was unusually still, as if the earth itself held its breath. They had left before dawn, passing through the fog-drenched valleys and the narrow back roads that wove through rural Georgia, until the GPS blinked out again, and they had to rely on the handwritten directions Kendra had received. The retreat, according to the scrap of paper, was located beyond a shuttered church and down a gravel road that no longer appeared on any map. As they turned off the main route, the tires crunched against rocks and loose soil, kicking up clouds of dust that hung in the morning air. The deeper they went, the more the trees seemed to lean in, as if trying to stop them from reaching whatever lay ahead. Kendra's heart beat steadily in her chest, but she could sense Marcus's tension beside her. He hadn't spoken much that morning. His fingers gripped the dashboard, and he stared ahead with the gaze of a man who had waited too long, seen too much, and still dared to hope. Valerie, in the car behind, had spent most of the drive in silence too, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her lips moving soundlessly in prayer. The daughters, Ashley and Nicole, had insisted on coming, though neither quite knew what they would find. When they crested a small ridge, the forest parted like a curtain, revealing a high chain-link fence that circled a cluster of low buildings with whitewashed walls and darkened windows. There was a gate at the front, padlocked and topped with rusting barbed wire. A wooden sign, partially obscured by vines, read simply, "The Retreat." No visitors, no trespassing, private land. They parked just outside the gate. No other vehicles were visible, no signs of recent activity. Kendra climbed out first, her boots hitting the gravel, the air thick with damp pine and moss. The others followed, slowly, like pilgrims at the end of a long journey. The gate was locked, but the fence wasn't tall enough to stop them. Marcus was the first to climb, his body slower than it once was, but fueled by something deeper than strength. Valerie went next, helped over by Ashley and Nicole. Kendra was last, swinging over and dropping lightly to the ground on the other side. The compound was eerily quiet. A single dirt path led to the central building, its windows shuttered and its door ajar. Weeds grew wild along the foundation, curling up the walls like fingers. They approached as one, hearts pounding in rhythm. Inside, the air was stale and still. The foyer opened into a common room with faded couches and dusty bookshelves. A fireplace sat cold at the far end, its mantel lined with children's drawings and plastic flowers. There was no one there. They split up, cautiously, silently. Kendra and Marcus headed left while Valerie, Ashley, and Nicole moved toward the back rooms. The hallway smelled of mildew and age. Doors lined both sides. Bedrooms most likely. Kendra opened them one by one, each revealing small, impersonal spaces with single beds, folded blankets, and little else. No photographs, no toys, nothing to mark a life. Then Marcus stopped. "This one," he said. Kendra stepped beside him. The room was the same as the others, except for one thing. On the wall above the bed, someone had drawn 3 sunflowers. The style was childlike but careful. Yellow petals, green stems, thick black outlines. Marcus stared at them unmoving. "That was her favorite flower," he said. "We had a garden. She used to pick them, bring them inside, and leave them on the windowsill." He stepped into the room, his breath catching. She was here. In the back hallway, Valerie and the girls came upon a different kind of door. Solid, metal, with a bolt lock on the outside. It looked out of place in a residence, more like something from a facility, or a prison. Ashley reached for the handle, but Nicole stopped her. "Wait." She listened, then nodded. "Someone's in there." They called for Kendra and Marcus, and once they were all together, Marcus gripped the bolt and slid it free. The door creaked open. Inside was a small room. Bare walls, no windows, a single bed bolted to the floor. And sitting on the edge of that bed, arms folded tightly around her knees, was a woman. She looked up slowly as the light poured in. Her eyes were dark, haunted, but alive. She didn't speak. Valerie stepped forward, her voice breaking. "Naya?" The woman stared. No flicker of recognition, but her body swayed, just slightly, as if the name struck some buried chord. Ashley stepped forward next. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the beaded necklace. "I have this," she said, "and you have one too. Our mother made them." Nicole stood beside her, silent but steady. Kendra watched from the doorway as something shifted in the woman's expression. Her arms loosened. Her eyes flicked to the necklace. Her lips parted. Uh, uh, her voice cracked from disuse. She tried again. T. Nicole moved closer. Latifah, that's me. I'm Latifah. The woman blinked, then looked at Ashley. Aisha. Ashley nodded, tears streaming now. Marcus stepped forward, unable to speak, his hands trembling. And then Nia stood. Her movements were unsteady but deliberate. She crossed the room, barefoot and silent, and wrapped her arms around her father. He crumpled into her, sobbing. Valerie followed, and then the others. They held her as if they might never let go. Later, as the sun broke through the trees, they sat together in the common room. Nia wrapped in a blanket, her hands clasped between Ashley's and Nicole's. Kendra sat nearby, watching the light return to the woman's face, slowly like dawn. They found records in the office, notes confirming Nia had been transferred here in late 1994, kept in isolation for therapeutic observation, then left in the care of a woman named Sister Margaret, who had died 2 years ago. No one else had come. No one had checked. She had been forgotten, by the system, by the world, but not by her family. They stayed that night in a motel off the highway, all 6 of them sharing adjacent rooms. Valerie and Marcus didn't sleep, but they didn't need to. They lay side by side, holding hands, the space between them no longer hollow. Ashley and Nicole stayed with Nia, taking turns sitting beside her as she slept. In the quiet hours of early morning, Kendra heard them laughing, softly, hesitantly, like girls who had finally found their way back to something real. A week later, the story broke. Kendra published everything: names, locations, documents. Survivors came forward. Investigations were launched. Reverend Felix Morrison's political campaign imploded overnight. He was arrested within days, charged with conspiracy, unlawful detainment, and dozens of other crimes. But for the Hunt family, justice had already begun, not in a courtroom, not in headlines, but in the moment a woman remembered her name, in the arms that held her, in the flowers they planted together that spring. 3 daughters lost, 3 daughters found, a family reclaimed. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more. Check out the next video and explore others on the channel. And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to see it.